Let's dive right in. We're going to read this passage together. If you're new, this is how things work. We read the passages together, then you discuss your observation in the text with the people that are in your general vicinity. So let's kick things off. As they were going down along the road, someone said to him, "I'll follow you wherever you go." And Jesus said to him, "Foxes have dens, and birds of the sky have nests, but the human one has nowhere to rest his head." To another he said, "Follow me." But he said, "First let me go and bury my father." And Jesus said to him, "Leave it to the dead to bury their own dead. But you, go out and announce the empire of God. Don't react violently against the one who is evil. When someone slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other as well. If someone is determined to sue you for your shirt, let him have your cloak along with it. When anyone conscripts you for 1 mile, go along an extra mile. Be sly as snakes and as simple as pigeons. Get going. Struggle to get in through the narrow door. I'm telling you, many will try to get in, but won't be able. When you're about to appear with your accuser before the magistrate, do your best to settle with him on the way, or else he might drag you up before the judge, and the judge turn you over to the jailer, and the jailer throw you in prison. I'm telling you, you'll never get out of there until you've paid every last cent." All right, so these verses aren't necessarily together. These are the verses that a very prominent group of historians and scholars feel that were the words and teachings of the historic Jesus, or at least they're what the early church said were the teachings of the historic Jesus. So talk about these observations with your group. Maybe discuss what you think Jesus might have been saying here, and we'll come back and share those thoughts with each other in just a moment. All right. What's kind of observation they want to share with the group? Who wants to kick things off? Be brave. Nobody's going to bite you here, I promise. Yes, Jason.
Well, I like for one to be as sly as snakes and do everything in your power to avoid being held accountable for actions that you're not responsible for. Then when you're done, act like you have no idea what's going on.
That's my son's motto. That's funny. Who else we got? Yes. We missed you, by the way, Bernie. Missed both you and Veronica.
The passage on the fox have dens and the birds of the sky have nests. So one of the Jesus Seminar scholars, Dominic Crossan, who was one of the co-founders of the Jesus Seminar, he has a book called The Essential Jesus, where it's his own translations of, this is the scholar's version that the Jesus Seminar commissioned for their books, but he does his own translations.
Oh, nice.
In his little slender volume of what he considers the sayings of Jesus that are most essential. And he translates this passage as foxes have dens, birds of the sky have nests, but only humans have nowhere to rest their head. So it really makes it a statement about the human condition, of the way that humanity is in this continual state of precarity because of the way that we are no longer embedded in the natural world in the way a fox or birds of the sky are. But we've been dispossessed from our natural heritage. So it's really a statement on the order that creates homelessness amongst humanity in general.
Interesting. I haven't read that one yet. I read a different take on that, but I like that too. So now I'm like, kind of feel bad about the point I'm going to make with that, because I think that one's a little bit better. That's good stuff. What else? Well, I'll take one more. Yes.
We were talking about the verse, the leave it to the dead to bury their own dead, and initially seeing that as like a little bit of a harsh statement and not really, maybe sort of dismissing the opportunity to grieve, but Kyle pointed out that the negation of that phrase would then to be the living should focus on the living and take care of the living. And that's where, so really to be like present in the moment where you are.
I like that too. And I mean, I don't think there's a day that goes by that I'm not reminded of how finite life is, and how temporary this experience is. And I don't want to be the kind of person that dies, with regret. And there's so many people that everything's fine, and they experience tragedy, and they're like, oh, I wish I had more time with them. And the reality is, you don't. So enjoy your family, y'all. Like, you may not have time tomorrow. I just had a friend that lost somebody very dear to them, and you're not promised tomorrow. Life is a piece of paper. Sorry to bring you down, but enjoy people while you got them. You feel me? You understand? All right. Now, for a long time, I took this verse about foxes and birds to mean that Jesus was advocating for simplicity. And one of my favorite authors in modern times is Shane Claiborne. Raise your hand if you ever heard of Shane at all. If you ever see him, the dude is a walking conundrum. Like, he's a pretty progressive evangelical. I wouldn't classify him as a progressive Christian, but he's pretty progressive evangelical. The dude has hair that's down to his, or used to anyway, I think he recently cut it, but he had hair down to his ankles that was in dreads. Not because he was trying to appropriate culture, but because he didn't want to spend money on getting a haircut. He was paid 6 figures to do public speaking events, and he gave all but $15,000 away every year to the poor. He made his clothes out of potato sacks. He's a really cool guy. I may not agree with him theologically, but his methodology is spot on. He's a really cool dude. And he has a monastic community in Philadelphia, and his community has this really cool story in his book called The Irresistible Revolution, where they were arrested for sleeping in a park. Now, they were doing this as part of a public protest, because like Santa Cruz, there were unjust sleeping bans in Philadelphia at the time. And this community decided to go out and protest and sleep in the park every night as a public protest. And eventually they were busted, and unfortunately for them, they had a prosecutor against them that was just out for blood. He was looking for them to be punished, which Shane thought was hysterical, right? Because at one point the prosecutor said because of their past problems with serving the community illegally and breaking the law to sleep in the park, he wanted to issue 500 hours of community service for each person, and Shane interrupted him and was like, oh no, please don't make us serve the poor. He's a really funny guy. But according to Shane, at one point the judge looked at Shane's t-shirt, and his t-shirt read, Jesus was homeless. And the judge asked if that was historically accurate. And Shane quoted this verse that we read today about foxes and eagles or birds. And according to him, even though the prosecutor was out for blood, the judge ignored the prosecutor. And the judge said if it was not for people protesting the bad laws, we could not create truly just laws in this country. He said these people are not criminals, they're freedom fighters, and he considered their servitude to the poor as time served. Give him a round of applause. That was a really cool book. As a matter of fact, when I started to get into church planning, I called people for advice, and Shane was one of the 2 people that called me back, and he didn't give me any advice. If you ever hear him talk, he talks like this. He's real country. He's from the mountains of Tennessee. He's like, Christopher, I don't have any advice for you, man. I wear potato sacks for clothes. He said, but I just want to pray for you. And the dude prayed with me on the phone for like 15 minutes. It was just a really cool experience. I'll never forget that. And as fun of a story as that is, and as cool of a guy as Shane is, I don't think it's a reflection of the intent of this passage. This is one of those times where Jesus' methodology probably would not be welcome in modern churches today, because the term, from what I understand in Rob Bell's book, What is the Bible, the research he's done is that foxes and birds of the air in their original context are actually an insult. The term birds of the air is referring to the Roman Empire, because one of their national symbols was an eagle. And anytime you see that phrase, birds of the air, according to Rob Bell, in the Gospels, it's a political metaphor. Because ancient Jewish folks that were critical of Roman rule called their officials and soldiers birds of the air as a mocking term, kind of like little birdies. You guys are just little birdies. And in some ways, this term was implying that Rome was weak, which we know was far from true, but they were still mocking the empire. A modern practice that we could use as a comparative example is smack talk that sports teams and sports fans engage in. Like back home in South Carolina, college football is everything. In fact, it still is for me. I'm a huge LSU fan. God Tigers, who by the way are kicking major ass this year. So proud. But anyway, if we were playing a team like the Georgia Bulldogs, right? We might call them puppy dogs as a way to demean the other team. Or for Alabama, their team slogan, does anybody know Alabama's team slogan? Oh, you see, nobody watches college football because it's Roll Tide. And you can't just say roll, they got to say Roll Tide. And if we ever beat Alabama, we would say Roll Tears. So this, according to Rob Bell, was Jesus engaging in a form of ancient smack talk against the empire. And we see that trend continue when Jesus talks about foxes having dens. The worst insult back in that day you could call an ancient Jewish person was anybody remember?
Dog.
A dog. Specifically, the worst dog you could call someone is a fox. It would be the modern equivalent of an effing SOB. And this term implied that not only were you an SOB, but that you were corrupt and that you were in bed with an evil authority, and maybe you had some type of hidden agenda. So Jesus, according to Rob Bell, may have been referring to the institutional authorities of his faith at that time, because that community was kind of getting in bed with Roman practices, Roman values, and Roman interest. Now the next passage, I think, speaks for itself, right? We were talking, actually, I don't know if it speaks for itself. I really like Kyle's interpretation of that. But let the dead bury their own dead. But if we look carefully once again at the end of the verse, we see that Jesus was announcing the kingdom of God, and he was stoking a sense of urgency for all of his followers to take up the cause, to create this kingdom of justice and equality and love. Now in the next verse, we see a passage that has been talked about quite often in churches and is often taken out of context. And it's used to instruct people to tolerate abusive behavior and tyrannical rule. In reality, this passage is quite interesting because it's totally the opposite of how most churches apply it today. Jesus, here, when he talks about turning the other cheek, was instructing people how to disrupt the empire. And I love this verse because I think Jesus, contrary to popular belief, was all about a fight. But according to Jesus, how we fight mattered. And rather than teaching folks to be complicit and complacent, or to throw their lives away in a pointless attempt at violently taking on a Roman legion that literally outgunned those under the boot of oppression already, Jesus taught others how to conduct nonviolent subversion effectively. Remember, Jesus hardly ever spoke of heaven and hell after death. He talked about them in the realm of right now. And for Jesus, in the realm of his hell, and in his now, Roman rule was oppressing his people. It was a hellish entity. And we talk about that often here. Rome was burdening Jewish peoples with unjust taxes. Rome was slaughtering people that questioned their authority. And their land of the Jewish people, it was stolen from them, from these invaders. And they just wanted the oppression to cease. And rather than offering a military solution, which had failed time and time again, all of these uprisings, or a self-help book to find peace in the middle of this shit sandwich like chicken soup for the occupation of Jerusalem, Jesus offered a third way, a non-violent, loving way, but a love that was louder than their oppressors' bullshit, turning the other cheek. Now, most people take this to mean that Jesus was saying, just let an enemy hit you. Don't fight back, because eventually they're going to stop. How often do we see that in history, right? Bullies usually don't stop. And this is not quite what Jesus was saying. Jesus was not promoting violence, but he certainly wasn't promoting pacifism either. It was a way to confront your opponent without being killed, because uprisings were always met with execution in Rome, specifically with crucifixion, which Jesus would one day find out. And it's not a picnic. But let me give you an example. Let me use a volunteer. Any volunteers? Any volunteers? I'll take Jason. Jason, you helped me with this before. 'Cause we reviewed this before. I'll give Jason a round of applause. He made a good sport. Some of you might remember this, because when we walked through Mark, we talked about this. Jason, just stand right here. Now, does anybody has anybody traveled to other countries where it's inappropriate to shake someone's left hand? Has anybody ever done that? Why is it inappropriate to shake someone's left hand? Yes, Meredith.
That's the hand you wipe.
This is the hand you put on your pooper, right here. You don't touch other people's left hand. It's actually insulting to you. It makes you look like a very rude person. Now, Rome had permission to openly slap a citizen, or a Jewish citizen, in the face, like this. Now, when you turn the other cheek, you weren't saying, hit me again, because you can't slap like that effectively. You're not getting the full cheek. You've got two options. You can either hit with your left hand, which makes you look like a D-bag, it makes you look like a very rude person in public, or you gotta do what? You gotta backhand them, or you have to punch them, which was actually illegal. It was considered to be excessive force. So by Jason turning the other cheek, it was a non-violent way for Jason to say, show me how evil you really are. Show me how bad you want to hurt me, because Jason could then report that Roman official, and they could be beaten, and they could actually be killed for doing that. So, usually, at that point, the beatings stopped. Isn't that interesting? Go give Jason a round of applause. Thank you, Jason. Now, I'm not going to do a volunteer for the next one because it talks about taking your shirt and giving them the cloak as well. We don't need a volunteer, just use your imagination. For Jewish people at that time, it was shameful to disrobe a person. It was symbolic of you taking everything that they possessed, because the last thing that people would take in a seizing of assets was their clothing. And it was shameful for a Jewish citizen to disrobe a person in public. So if a tax collector, these Jewish tax collectors that were kind of working hand in hand with the temple and with Rome, if they took your nice outer garment that was to pay your debt, that would end up paying Rome, you would then strip down naked to avoid paying the tax entirely, unless the tax collector was willing to be shamed publicly by taking your garments. And most probably were not. So this shamed the agent of the state. And what's amazing is because they weren't willing to take these garments to pay taxes, it actually hit Rome in the wallet too. Rome couldn't collect anything. Now what about going 2 miles instead of 1? It was illegal at that time for any Roman official to make Jewish citizens carry their bags or their weapons, if they were soldiers, for 1 mile. But how could they measure a mile? Well, guess which ancient society invented the mile and the mile marker? Rome. Rome invented it. However, if they forced Jewish people to walk any further than 1 mile, if they were caught, then that soldier could again be punished for abusing their privileges and for using excessive force. So you would just keep walking, hoping that the soldier would get caught. So soldiers eventually stopped asking people that were part of the early church movement to help carry their things because they could get in trouble. So let's put all of these instructions from Jesus together. With these nonviolent protests, Jesus was essentially saying that unless you, as the oppressed, make your voice heard and simultaneously, and this part's really important too, avoid dying at the hands of your oppressor, then your oppression's never going to end for your people, because your oppression has no reason to end. Because you're either going to take it, or you're not going to take it anymore, you're going to react violently, and then you're going to be killed anyway. So for Jesus, he was saying, unless we, the oppressed, hit the streets and creatively figure out how to disrupt peacefully, so the state does not end our uprising by killing the members of our movement, the rich are only going to get richer, and the poor will only continue to drown in more injustice. Are you guys with me so far? Very good. On to the next verse. Now, the narrow gate is a conversation that always brings back memories for me, as this is a passage that was used in my career to convince Christians not to drink, not to smoke, not to have premarital sex, watch rated R movies. Basically, Christians couldn't have any fun whatsoever. But when I think about the context of this verse and where this verse was placed in the Sermon on the Mount, it was far more a message that was trying to teach societal values rather than a specific individual code of ethics. The narrow gate in this passage, because of where it's placed, probably was talking about love and justice. The narrow gate is about creating a just society, a peaceful society, a loving society. Because if you think about it, a society that's judgmental and exclusionary, it's not really that narrow of a gate historically. I mean, many nations throughout history, many faiths, even atheists in some cultures, have figured out ways to oppress others. And I'm not saying that to demean any other faith, because Christianity is probably the worst culprit of all of them. But they've all done this, all nations, all faith communities, with or without any spiritual beliefs. They figured out ways to exclude others and oppress those that they don't deem worthy of respect. But loving everyone unconditionally to the point that you will stand and sacrifice yourself for the oppressed, now that's truly a rare sight to behold. All right, on to the next verse. This next verse has been taken and used to teach Christians to never sue their opponent in a court of law. And on minor matters, I obviously agree with this. A friend of mine was recently injured, had a pretty gnarly injury, in his friend's home. And the friend was very upset that this happened, and he has offered without any argument to pay for my friend's medical bills that was injured in his house. In the worst case scenario, they're going to jointly file a homeowner's claim, and they're still going to be friends no matter what. That's a great practice. That's honorable, and we should all embrace that as a community. But on matters of justice, I actually disagree with how church teaches this. Because what we've done is we've prolonged people being held to account for crimes against humanity, for crimes against the planet, and it's got to stop. PG&E should be held to account. Oil companies should be held to account. Donald freaking Trump and his minions that are dropping like flies because they want to avoid prosecution should be held to fucking account. Tyrants, fascists, colonizers, racists, bigots, and war criminals should be judged. They should be convicted to the fullest extent of the law. I'm not advocating for the death penalty, but they should be held to account. And I would not excuse their crimes against our planet or humanity either. And that may hit a nerve for some of you folks. You may not have heard that in church before. But how long are we going to let injustice go unchecked before we stand and say, you know what? No more. Done. How long? Because I gotta tell you, these people aren't just gonna change on their own. If they were going to, I maintain, if these people that have benefited from corrupt rule were gonna change anytime soon, then Flint would have had clean water years ago. So what do we do with this verse? We have to remember at this time the institution of faith that Jesus was a part of was corrupted by Roman policies. The way of Rome was being merged with the temple. Kind of like today, because the church looks a lot more like Rush Limbaugh than it looks like Jesus. But back then, taking someone to court meant that someone was going to receive, one of the two parties was going to receive severe and in all likelihood unjust punishment. Especially if the claim against you landed you in front of a Roman magistrate as opposed to the temple courts. So Jesus was saying, yes, you may get your revenge, you may get repayment, and they may get their comeuppance, but in court, I guarantee you, the crime will not fit their time. They're going to be punished severely and unjustly for something that required far less response. And sadly, today I have an excellent modern scenario that parallels this line of thinking that also doubles as an instruction today. For this, white people Stop calling the goddamn police on people of color. Stop. We live in a time where people of color are being murdered in their homes by trigger-happy, racist death for something small. Something like selling cigarettes. Something like holding a cell phone. Something like playing video games in your own home. Stop calling the police on people of color. Period. Instead, talk to them. Go ask if they need help. Get to know your neighbors, for crying out loud. Fellow white people, too many people have died, and it's not worth the risk. If you hear nothing else, hear that today. Now, with all that being said, I want you to talk about application, and we'll come back and share those thoughts in just a moment. So Brenda had a comment online, and it is a good comment, and I want to clarify something. When I say, and this is very important, when I say stop calling the police on people of color, I'm not saying that every individual cop is bad. But what I am saying is not that all the apples are bad, it's that the barrel that the apples are in is bad, right? Like, too many racist cops that are in bed with neo-Nazi groups are being discovered left and right. And not only are they being discovered, but they're not being punished for their affiliations with these groups. And the system itself is what's bad. So I wanted to clarify that. I just wanted to say that. And also, Sarah said something that was really important, I think. She said she wants restorative justice, not a police presence. And I would agree with that. So Sarah, we missed you today, but thanks for tuning in online. That was a good comment. I'm going to take a few more. What else we got? Yes?
It's about public humiliation. When you see someone do something they're not supposed to, bring them to shame in front of their peers and family. So it has a lasting effect.
Well, I think that is something that we hesitate to do, right? Like, and I'm still wrestling with this. I have family members, I have friends that believe some pretty gnarly things right now. And their pushback for me is you're willing to separate yourself because we have a political disagreement. At this day and age, we're not disagreeing about politics in this country. We're disagreeing about morality.
Yes, I agree.
And that is worth putting up boundaries with folks about.
Yes.
There are some people that are convinced that they're doing things for the right reason, and if you can talk to them, if you can reason with them, maybe you can convince them that they're wrong. But there are some people that are literally celebrating that kids are in cages. I know, I'm from a very rural part of the South. People are happy about this. And if we don't make steps to address it, to confront them, and not excuse their bigotry, I can tell you as a person that was a bigoted asshole for most of my life, that until somebody confronted me and told me exactly what I was, I never changed. And they won't either. So have courage, confront them. Don't be afraid to even break out some shame if necessary if they're harming other people. All right, next comment. Yes. By the way, so good to have you back. Yes.
Where it says we smile as a snake and be simple as a pigeon, me and Jason were discussing that we gotta learn what would be shaming them in modern terms and in past terms.
Like a modern, yeah, obviously turning the other cheek isn't going to do anything right now, right? So one thing that I think is an awesome practice, and a lot of people get mad about this in church communities, I think it's great. If you see something going on, if you see a police officer bullying someone, if you see somebody using racial slurs, break out your cell phone and spread their picture all over the internet. Let everyone see them for who they are. Because one, people of color, people in the LGBT community, they need to know who these bigots are to be safe. That's first and foremost. Number two, they need to be exposed. It needs to be exposed. Just like turning the other cheek was meant to expose the oppression of the oppressor, you need to expose the racism, the sexism, the intolerance of people that are seeding this into our nation. Good stuff. One more. Going once. Going twice. So, all right. In closing, I'd like to read the transcript of Elijah Cummings' first speech in 1996. We lost an American hero this week. I apparently, according to what I've read, he's been sick for a while. I didn't know this. And this gentleman has been an inspiration for me at certain points of my life. He has been a sacred thorn in Trump's ass, which I have loved. And before I read this speech, can we all just give Elijah Cummings and the work he did with his life a round of applause? I was too young to hear this speech, but it kind of went viral. This was his first speech back in 1996, and I think the words are so powerful, I just wanted to share it with you all. He said this: "Only God could create this path. Only God. Only God could create a path where the son of two sharecroppers from Manning, South Carolina, could rise to represent the people of the 7th Congressional District of the Congress of the United States of America. Only God. And so I must first and foremost thank God for this amazing opportunity. I also thank God for giving me the strength and the humility and the courage to walk the path that God has given me. So often we in public life forget that we are very fortunate to come upon this earth and have an opportunity to serve others. So often we forget because we get so caught up in our own battles, in our own struggles. So much so that many people wish they could have the problems that we think we have. And so I'm just a happy, happy man today. I'm happy because I represent a diverse district, a very diverse district. We have people who have lots of problems. We have people who have very nice homes. We have people who are struggling, just trying to make it, and it honors me tremendously to know that they would send me here to represent them. I've often said on the floor of the Maryland House of Delegates that our world would be a much better world and a much better place if we would only concentrate on things that we have in common instead of concentrating on things that separate us. Because it's easy to find differences, very easy. We need to take more time to find common ground. And so my mission is one that comes out of a vision that was created long, long ago. It's a mission and a vision to empower people, to make people realize that the power is within them, that they too can do the things that they want to do. And so I'm about that mission, and I'm looking forward to joining with all of you as we travel this road. I often call this road a journey, which I define as life. And there's a poem that Perrin Mitchell said many years ago that I say to myself 20 times a day, and it's a very simple poem, but it's one that I live by. I love this poem, by the way. It says this: "I only have 1 minute, 60 seconds in it. Forced upon me, I did not choose it, but I know that I must use it, give account if I abuse it, suffer if I lose it, only a tiny little minute, but eternity is in it." And so I join you as we move forward to uplift not only this nation, but our world. Let's give this American hero our gratitude one more time. And until next week, may the peace of the Lord Christ go with you, wherever it may send you. May it guide you through the wilderness and protect you through the storms. May it bring you home rejoicing at the wonders that it shows you, and may it bring you home rejoicing once again into our doors. Grace and peace to every one of you.